What is up, guys? Welcome back to another GeekaWhat video. In this video, I'm going to be building a super upgradable $700 gaming PC build for 2022 and beyond. I'll be running you through all the components I selected for this video, talking about just how you can go and pick them up in the current climate, and then testing out the performance of the build later on, as well as discussing the future-proofing and upgrade paths we've specifically built into this video. I'm going to kick things off by talking through the rationale behind each of the 8 components that make this build possible before putting it together. At the heart of the system is the CPU, the AMD Ryzen 5 3600. The 3600 is technically a last generation chip, but with 6 cores, 12 threads and decent clock speeds that are just below the 3600X, is going to work really well and comes in for under $200, at least MSRP. Latest pricing and availability can be found linked at the affiliate links below. I'll be coupling this up with a motherboard from MSI, the B550M PRO-VDH. Now, I think this is an awesome budget motherboard for this system, but to tell you the truth, you do have a few choices. You could technically save yourself some money by going for Gigabyte's B450M S2H, an older motherboard that does have the right BIOS out of the box to be compatible. You don't get Gen 4 SSD support, you don't get SSD heatsinks, nor do you get the latest snazzy USB 3 technology. Or you can go the other extreme, go slightly higher end again and get the B550M mortar, also from MSI. This board also comes with a Wi-Fi derivative, something you may find useful to note if you need that kind of connectivity. For us though, the PRO-VDH will work a treat. Memory or RAM is provided by a 16GB kit of Patriot's Viper Steel, DDR4, 3600 to 4000 MHz is perfect for a Ryzen processor. Dual channel as well, meaning 2 DIMMs, so twice the bandwidth, which with Ryzen does give you a 10 to 15% performance boost over a single DIMM. So definitely important you get the right speed and the right channel RAM. For storage in this build, I've gone ahead and picked up Seagate's BarraCuda Q1, a nice entry-level SATA drive that gives you good performance in the region of 300-400 megabytes a second. That's around 3 to 4 times faster than a hard drive, but is slower than a more expensive NVMe option, which you can pick up if you want some slightly faster storage. Power is provided in this build by the power supply Corsair CX650F. With 650 watts of 80 plus bronze output, it's a fully modular unit, meaning you only plug in the cables you need, no cable management headaches today, and it has an RGB fan, because it's from Corsair. And of course it does. Finally, before looking at the case where we'll be building our system today, this is the GPU I've gone for. Now, the current market, buying a graphics card is next to impossible, especially one of the latest 30 series or even new AMD 6000 series. They're pretty good GPUs, either new or used. They're not very good for GPU mining, so you shouldn't have any issues picking up a card that's been thrashed with Ethereum or Bitcoin as a general rule of thumb. And with 4GB of video memory, it does give them a little bit of an edge with more modern titles. This system though is designed to be future-proofed. You can swap out your 1650 for a 3060 or at this rate 4060 by the time that one rolls around, and you won't have to upgrade any of your other components. The power supply, CPU, memory are all going to be completely A-OK, and you won't have any major bottlenecking either. That's not to say though the build in its current form with the 1650 is going to be bad. It won't. 1080p gaming is the sweet spot. If you'd like to game at 1440p, then picking up a scalp GPU or winning a Newegg lottery is probably going to be the option you want to look at. But for this system at least, the 1650 works well. With the bulk of the components covered off, we can go ahead and actually build the system in the case, which has come out of nowhere. This is one of Cooler Master's really great ATX options that doesn't break the bank. Part of their MasterBox series, it supports plenty of hardware, and there are airflow and less airflow versions available. This one has an acrylic front panel, so not as nice as the glass you'll find on something like a Corsair 4000X RGB, but it is much cheaper for it, something that's important in a build like this. Some people may be confused as to why we've gone for a larger case than our motherboard requires. Truth is, for a first time builder, it makes things a lot easier. That's not to say you should go huge for your first system. This is a perfect standard form factor that isn't too bulky. It obviously also depends on how much room you've got for your system. Before we actually get carried away though and install the motherboard into the case, before we do any of that, we need to install as many components onto the motherboard first before worrying about the chassis. Take your motherboard out of the box and don't forget this bad boy. This is your I/O shield. We'll need this later. It's very important to keep this handy and safe to one side. Drop your motherboard onto its box, ditch the anti-static bag, we don't need this, and then take your CPU or processor. Now this right here, as I say, is an AMD Ryzen chip, making the installation a lot easier than on the Intel side of things. Find the golden triangle on your CPU, match this up with the triangle on your CPU socket, and pull up the arm nice and easily. Go ahead and very carefully drop your CPU into place. This is what they call a zero insertion force socket, meaning the next stage, pushing the arm down, requires zero insertion force. Nice. We're going to be coupling the CPU up with the stock cooler from AMD. I didn't explicitly mention this earlier, as it comes included for free with your CPU in the box. It will come with pre-applied thermal paste, but if you've used it before, you'll want to drop a dab of your own on about the size of a grain of rice, and then screw the cooler in. The cooler just screws into the 4 holes on the motherboard that are there when you get it. Nice and simple, nice and easy, and this will do a good enough job. Now is also a good time to install the RAM or the memory. Now, as I say, this is a lovely 16 gig kit, and the neutral sort of gunmetal grey colour will look really good in the build. It's actually quite heavy memory as well, all things considered. Not a bad thing by any means, but will work well. One thing I forgot to point out about this motherboard is the 4 RAM DIMM slots. The fact you can install up to 4 DIMMs or 2 in dual channel mode is a huge plus. And for us today, we'll be using the 2nd and 4th slots. Pull back the clips on these slots and then go ahead and line your memory up. Slide it into the slot nice and easily. Apply a bit of pressure with each thumb to both sides of the DIMM, or you can do it one-handed if you're feeling really quite adventurous, and then your memory will be installed. Awesome. Now, if you've got an M.2 SSD, you'll install this now as well into your M.2 slot, but we haven't, so it's time to go ahead and get our case back in position to install the motherboard once and for all. Now, on our fancy overhead camera angle, you should be able to see a number of standoffs on the motherboard tray. These are what we'll be using to install the board into place. At the moment, we're missing one at the top because we need 3 at the top. We're missing one across the middle because we need 3 along the middle. And then we're also missing 2, one here and one here on the holes marked M. These are for a smaller micro ATX motherboards where your bottom 2 holes are in differing places. Move the standoffs from one part of the case to the other with either the included standoff tool or a pair of needle nose pliers, and that will make your motherboard install a lot easier. You're then able to take the motherboard's rear I/O we mentioned a few minutes ago now, and then you can slide that into this back rectangular cutout in the case. It is quite fiddly, as you can see from me absolutely cocking this one up first time. So take your time, be a bit patient. That's looking a little bit better now, and then we can actually go ahead and screw the motherboard in. Slide your ports through the I/O on the rear that you've literally just popped into place, and then you can proceed and screw it down a lot easier. Fasten it down through all of the, I want to say 7-ish standoff holes, 6-7 standoff holes, and that's basically it. Next up, I think it makes sense to install the GPU or the graphics card. And now installing a GPU in any build is nice and simple. This one even more so because it doesn't require any external GPU power from the power supply. It's basically solely powered off the motherboard itself. And it's super small, meaning you haven't got to worry about the card being too long. Even still, from an upgrades point of view, you would struggle to find a GPU too long to fit into this case. You've got over like 40 centimeters, 400 millimeters of clearance, so it's nice and easy. Just remove the 2 rear PCIe slots that line up with your longest top PCIe slot, and then push the clip back and slide the GPU in. Nice and easy, and you'll hear a satisfying click sound once complete. Fasten it down with the same screws you removed from those PCIe lanes, and that's basically it. Great, that's looking pretty good, even if a little bit small inside the case, and it allows us to move on to the next component, the final part before we install the power supply, and that is of course our storage. Now, to install a 2.5-inch SSD in this case is actually really simple. Spin the case round to the rear and then locate these 4 rubber grommets. That's these 4 rubber holes right here. These are going to form the basis of a friction mount, and if you take a closer look at what they look like, they're basically just a 2-tier rubber pad that slots into the rear of the motherboard tray. You then want to take the SSD itself and locate the 4 holes on the underside, not on the sides, on the bottom of the drive. You'll then also find these. Now, these right here are some really small posts that come included with the case. We're going to screw these posts into the rear of the SSD, and then they will slot through the friction mount on the back of the motherboard tray. It will fasten down nice and easily and just hold into place using the power of the rubber grommets. Wire up with the SATA data and power cable, and that's basically it as far as the SSD is concerned. sound. Lastly then, it's time to install the power supply itself. Now, as I say, 650 watts is not only good for the build today, but also helps to future-proof it into the months and the years ahead, especially as GPU stock and availability hopefully continues to improve. For this system, there's a few cables we actually need to go ahead and install. We've got the largest of the bunch, which is the 24-pin motherboard cable, one end of course going into the modular interface on your power supply, and the other into your motherboard. We also want to install a SATA power cable, used for powering up the RGB on our fans, and of course the SSD drive, and this goes up to the rear of the power supply in the smallest of all the connectors. If that wasn't enough, we've also gone ahead and picked ourselves up a 4+4-pin CPU power connector. This of course powers up the processor, the CPU on our motherboard, and provides the extra power it needs in addition to that motherboard cable. While we're here, we're also going to go ahead and install this PCIe power connector. We can actually leave this wrapped up for now as we don't need to use it, not in this build anyway, but should you upgrade the GPU later, which I imagine for most people will be the plan, your cable's there, you're not going to lose it, and let's be honest, you've got plenty of cable management room in the bottom of your chassis, so you shouldn't have to worry about hiding this away in a drawer and needing to find it a year later. The power supply can slide into the case with either a fan up or a fan down orientation. I think I'm going to go fan down today, and then it will fasten into the 4 holes on the rear of your case, installing nice and easily. And with that, it's about time we boot the system up to see just how good it looks when it's all powered up, and then of course take a dive into performance shortly afterwards. I'll see you in a second, but first, roll that montage. Looking good. Now we've seen how good the system looks when it's all powered up, it's time for the all-important performance and benchmark section. On your screen now is a summary, a snapshot view of all the games we tested out on this PC at 1080p normal to medium settings. We saw some impressive frame rates with temperatures as well that stayed pretty cool, always a good sign in a build like this one, and all in all I was pretty impressed with the numbers we were able to gather. I will be taking though a closer look title by title to give you guys a better idea of performance, and as always, unedited gaming benchmark runs can be found at the channel linked in the description below. The first of those titles is GTA 5. Here at 1080p normal/medium settings, we achieved 148 frames per second on average, with 134 and 118 for the 90 and 99th percentile results, tested in the game's inbuilt benchmarking mode. We also tested out COD Vanguard, and here at 1080p medium settings, we managed to achieve 66 frames per second on average. This jumped to just over 70 at 1080p low, but sticking with medium settings for now saw some pretty good results. Consistent frame rates as well on the 90 and the 99th percentiles of 60 and 52 made for actually a pretty good showing. Talking of pretty good showings, Forza Horizon 5, the next game today. 1080p medium/normal settings tested in the game's inbuilt benchmarking mode gave us 63 frames per second on average, with 60 and 56 for the 90 and the 99th percentiles. Moving on to Apex Legends next up, here at 1080p medium, we got 100 frames per second on the dot. Exactly 100 FPS is a mightily good result for this system, and shows that playing the right games, you really can achieve some amazing frame rates. Oh, and did I mention, the frame rate never really went below 81 FPS with our 99th percentile measure. Really impressive. Valorant is the penultimate game on our list today. Here at 1080p high settings this time, we got 300 FPS, once again on the dot. It's a bit weird this is happening today, but I'm not going to complain. These are some great results, and Valorant is pretty easy to run. Finally then, the last title today is Fortnite. At 1080p competitive settings, so everything tuned down to low, the render distance set to far, we got 132 FPS. Awesome. With that, that pretty much wraps it up for today's video. If you enjoyed this one, give it a big old like rating, make sure to get subscribed. Thanks for tuning in though, and as always, we'll see you in the next one.